I asked the AI to tell me which are the hardest questions I can ask you.
The biggest mistake is to focus on revenue.
Well, maybe the next big thing is coming around the corner.
More products, more channels, increase complexity, and complexity is what kills scalability.
What are the key factors of success in terms of reaching out to the consumer? Hello and welcome to this episode of the E-commerce Germany News Podcast. My name is Efe von Thenen and today I have a very special guest. For 22 years, Robert Hein has seen the e-commerce industry develop. He's been the C-level executive at Berlin Brands Group. He's been the co-founder of Redcoon and he's been a CEO of 004. Robert and I have touched upon quite a lot of topics. And most importantly, we've talked about do's and don'ts for the startups and startup landscape. And Robert also told me about how he sees AI playing an important and significant role in e-commerce now and in the near future. And Robert told me about the next big crisis that is around the corner for e-commerce businesses. I suggest you don't miss this episode. Let's go. Today I'm delighted to welcome Robert Hein from Berlin Brands Group. Robert has guided and Robert has been there for the last 22 years, guiding e-commerce startups and also established e-commerce businesses, has been around for quite some time, has seen the market evolve. I'm very happy to have you, Robert. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm very excited to be here. My journey started 22 years ago. I'm originally from the US, from Chicago, and a colleague in Chicago said, hey, let's go to Germany and start e-commerce. I know a brick and chain mortar company there, and they have a chain of electronic stores, and they don't want to go online. So why don't we do that? And that was the year 2000. Came over, met them, made a deal on a napkin in a Greek restaurant over lunch, flew back, quit our jobs, and 6 weeks later we were in Germany starting our first e-commerce business. Now, out of that, e-commerce was in its really early stages, and went and then created also 004, a full-service enterprise e-commerce service provider. 004 was always around enabling e-commerce models for all types of companies, small brands, but also large brands like Deutsche Telekom and the T-Online shop that we built up for Axelspring and the Build Shop. So we're constantly in interaction, building different strategies and different e-commerce infrastructures within the German market. And then we also expanded, not only across Europe, but then later with the joint venture in Qatar. We looked at MENA, so Northern Africa, Middle East, but also then Southeast Asia. So that was quite an interesting time because they're on a completely different e-commerce evolutionary step. I did that for 3 years and then I thought, okay, it's time for a break. Took a sabbatical and then thought, oh, I've always wanted to be in Berlin. And Berlin, I was here a lot for clients, but thought it would be the right place. It's center of e-commerce and all the startups here in Berlin, and came in 2018 to Berlin and met Peter from Berlin Brand Group and found an exciting company, quite a large array at that point, but needing assistance to scale.
Could you tell us a little bit about what Berlin Brand Group does?
We call ourselves a digital house of brands. And what might be known, people know Berlin's Brand Group now from the aggregator space, but actually it starts much, much earlier. We have our own in-house brands, Klarstein being the largest one. We develop our own products and we market those in 23 different countries and 100 different channels.
So it's a typical D2C type of scenario?
It's a D2C model, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And coming into Berlin Brand Group, it was a classic situation, building infrastructure. How do I make this business scale? And that's what we then did over the last 3.5 years, was actually really making it scale.
Okay. You acquire businesses and then help them scale and scale them.
That is new.
Yeah.
So we've been doing that for the past 1.5 years.
Yeah.
And that's helped us grow our business, but our original business also tripled in size.
Okay, that's truly, it sounds to me a very, very big operation. And I've taken a look at your revenue levels, and so the operation is very, very big, and you have a reach of many, many consumers as well. I mean, that's why we thought of you today, because you are one of these people that can take the pulse of the e-commerce market in Germany, right? So right now we have had a couple of years of really disruptive times, and we've seen the Corona crisis. We're going to talk about all these crises that we're seeing and how that impacts startups on the one side, which you've also been around. You've seen the developments of startups, and also on the other hand, established businesses. You know what I mean? So right now we are in this whole inflation crisis and energy crisis. Well, maybe the next big thing is coming around the corner. Talking about that, you've also seen how a product, how a certain innovation can succeed in this market. You know, I'm very much interested to ask you what you think in your mind. What are the key factors of success in terms of reaching out to the consumer and giving them a product that they can be happy to consume, happy to buy, and happy to especially buy through e-commerce channels, right?
So I think the most important element is what you said. It's reaching out to the consumer. You have to be in contact with them.
Yeah.
So one of the core elements as you grow and you bring more and more products in is, how do I get an infrastructure in place that allows me to get all of this information quickly in place? How can I tweak them? How can I make products better? But how do I keep that conversation with the consumer going? Because they tell you what's good or not, and they tell you much faster than what you would normally expect. You don't have to wait for a product coming back or returns to take place in order to know that there's something to be fixed.
Yeah.
And you don't have to wait to see, oh, I've sold all of the stock that I've produced, to say, oh, this was a really successful product. You can see it earlier, and you can then work to make product better, or to actually make sure that your supply chain can get the products to you in time.
Yeah. How did the last year impact your business?
Wow. So it's kind of like the continuous change of what's been going on. We all went through COVID. I think that e-commerce in general profited from that.
Yeah.
Everyone had growth. One of the topics that we spend a lot of time on is having a resilient supply chain, making sure that we have enough product there,
Yeah.
being able to service the market, and also having our own infrastructure so we don't rely on external fulfillment, being able to handle those volumes, because there was huge increases there.
Yeah.
After COVID going away, you have kind of the rebound. So you see things leveling off a little bit,
Yeah.
and the challenge becomes different. How do you maintain growth in that kind of environment? So you have to focus on completely different areas. It's a lot of discipline involved. It's taking care of the minute details. Retail is detail. And it's really saying, okay, what do I have to do differently than my competitors to make sure that my products remain visible and that I can remain and gain market share in that area?
Yeah, it's maybe like one of those times where that 1% change does make a huge difference. You know what I mean? That's at least something that we've been observing. And yeah, I mean, those were the last couple of years. And you working with e-commerce for a long, long time, and what trends do you observe right now in the market?
Well, I think scalability is a huge issue.
Yeah.
How do I scale my business? I think in the aggregator space, you have a lot of people trying out e-commerce, developing brands, and seeing just this huge amount of passion in what they're doing, and some really great products coming out. So they see a niche, it's something that they're passionate about, and then they're building that. They're building a great customer experience around that, and that's exciting to see.
Yeah.
What happens though when they say, I need to do more? So they start saying, what are additional products that I can do? They start gaining complexity in what they do, and they're not able to scale their business. So we see a lot of that, of saying that first generation product is great, and there's so much effort, and there's so much feedback, and they're passionate about it, and you can't aggregate passion.
Yeah.
So you have founders that are doing a great job developing new products. When they try to go and say, oh, I want to expand in more channels, I want to expand in more markets.
Yeah.
Suddenly, they've got content in multiple languages. They're getting customer feedback in multiple languages. They don't have the people for that.
High complexity all of a sudden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And more products and more channels increase complexity. And complexity is what kills scalability.
Yeah.
So you need tools, you need infrastructure, and getting that jump between how do I start with a small, my first product, and going into how do I have an infrastructure in place so that I can really go into multiple countries. I can expand my product lines and do it successfully. That's the biggest hurdle.
Yeah.
Luckily, and that's one of the trends that we've seen, is there's more and more tools out there to help small, say, e-commerce newlings to build their businesses, be it ERP infrastructure that's cloud-based, that handles all of the operational elements, handles the complexity of tax issues across Europe, but also translation services, AI-based infrastructure that really allows people to say, oh, I have a listing in a certain language, and I want to have a really good listing in another language, but I don't speak that. How do I make that transition?
Makes it a smooth way to also expand to different markets and scale up, right?
Exactly. And that's the real challenge. How do I do it without losing that passion of that original product?
Without stretching too thin, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, when you think about the tools that you mentioned, do you have a couple of examples that you can tell us?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've always believed in is AI is going to make everything greatly scalable. And the whole idea of saying, oh, I'm going to replace human body and I'm going to replace that with a machine who can learn faster, they can give great answers around that. And we started looking at tools and initially we thought, oh, we'll build it ourselves. We're big, we do a huge amount of sales. We have enough data and transactions, and we should be able to solve everything, and we should be able to predict how much we're going to sell so that we know better how much we're going to buy.
Yeah.
We're going to predict when we need to change prices. And what we realize is we don't have enough data. And a lot of those things are really dependent upon the market. And we started looking at tools and saying, well, actually, there's AI tools out there that incorporate data from the entire market.
Yeah.
They bring it together. And we found use cases, for example, in optimizing Amazon PPC. We don't do that ourselves anymore. We use a free tool. It's available to everyone out there that can go and optimize their PPC because you know what? They're aggregating the information from the entire market. They react in real time. And when you get to an assortment of 7,000 products and you're across all Amazon channels, you cannot manage that. A human can't do that.
Yeah.
So there are certain things that AI is really well suited for, and I would really recommend people going out there. PPC, marketing, spending, automation is one great use case we've had good success with. Another area that we've used a lot is on the language side. ChatGPT is going around now. And
everyone is talking about it right now.
And there's great things, I think, that we're just starting to understand how we can use that. But we've already been using AI in language-based elements, chatbots.
Yeah.
Been really, really successful. Now there's a rethinking of how do I get people to use a chatbot, but they're open for it. How do I teach a chatbot so that it responds with the information from mine? You still need to go through that and have that understanding. But when it's in place and when you're feeding it enough information and it's automated, then you get real power.
Yeah.
And we've taken the same thing in looking at customer feedback. How do we take all this customer feedback with all these languages and bring it together so that we get information that we can use quickly and that we know how to act? We do that AI-driven.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And also for our viewers and listeners, anyone that's curious about what AI can do today, I would recommend to take a look at ChatGPT. As a matter of fact, I have an account there and I asked the AI to tell me which are the hardest questions I can ask you. I quickly realized that the AI is not very smart and not very funny, It's, but of course, I got all these tools that, just like you pointed out, everything that you can use utilizing AI within e-commerce. But I really like that you pointed out that it's not possible to start with small amount of data. You need to really go on the aggregate level and to really make the most out of it. But anyone who's curious to find out what AI can do today, I'd recommend to open an account at ChatGPT and just everything for free because it's experimental right now. And one of the biggest use cases also happening today is recommender systems in e-commerce. When you buy a certain product and you keep coming back, then it learns what your preferences are. In a way, it makes it more convenient for you and makes it a nicer, smooth user journey for the users. You know what I mean?
That's a really interesting point. And I want to take out one statement that you made there that I think is really important, and it's fundamental for success in e-commerce. The customer coming back and buying again and again and again. We have a great term in German that we coined a long time ago. One of the core goals that we had, every e-commerce project was to generate Wiederholtäter. Mm-hmm. Wiederholtäter, a term in English saying someone that does it again. We said that's the biggest goal for e-commerce. You want to get that customer back. So you need to know your customer, and then you need to get them back. So if you're looking at a multi-channel environment, how do I make sure that I'm always getting that customer relationship? Are the products that I am creating geared towards a repurchase? Are there relevant products in my assortment that get people to come back for that? That's a fundamental element. If you just have a Me Too product and a Me Too product that somebody buys once every 10 years, you're never going to have a customer relationship. You won't get someone that comes back, and you won't have any data to actually feed a recommendation engine.
But that's also where being a brand plays a big role, right? Like people are very loyal to certain brands, and we've seen that in the case of Apple. Even in the lowest of all times, the Apple user has been there for the brand because they had a certain loyalty. You know what I mean? And to build that brand based on innovative products and understanding the customer needs and keep giving them things that make sense for them or they might need is perhaps the key.
Exactly. And I think that that's sometimes forgotten. And a lot of discussions about marketplaces, and I can only encourage everyone that is building their business and building their brand, remember that's what you're actually doing. E-commerce is a channel, and there's a lot of channels out there.
Yeah.
It's an integral part. But if you're going to market your brand. If you're going to build your brand. Get that customer relationship in place. Make sure you have infrastructure in place to identify your customers, regardless where they come from, and give them an experience that they're actually looking to have. They want to have that relationship. Give it to them. And then they have a basis to grow.
And judging from the website of Berlin Brand Group, when you have that, when you have gone the first mile, and then everything else follows like a domino effect. All these brands also score very highly on marketplaces, on product comparison portals and everything, because they have managed to create that traffic, create that interest, and it's kind of like, I would say, maybe a domino effect,
You can say that Amazon, for example, it's a great testing ground. So if you manage to gain visibility, if you manage to get those reviews, if you manage to get traction in one place, in Amazon, it's a good sign that you have something strong there. But the trick is how do you expand that and how do you scale that up?
Yeah.
So it's a great testing ground, but it's not the end of the business model. It's actually just the beginning, because what you don't have at Amazon, you don't have the customer relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can use it to test, you can use it to gain visibility, but you can't build a sustainable e-commerce model only on Amazon.
Whereby you would have a strong dependency on one marketplace, one channel where, we've seen cases during the Corona pandemic that certain brands that we know have seen some Chinese replica maybe have like longer delivery times, but some of the consumers didn't see that at all. They thought they're buying from the same producer or the same company, but actually they were just buying the replica of whatever. And then it can be that certain times the requests, like let's say they want to address this issue, it might take some time, but in that time you're losing up to 90% of your revenue, right?
Yes.
Which is a big problem.
It's a major problem, and it's one of those elements why if I'm talking with e-commerce startups, mentoring them, helping them, I always say you need to make sure that you're focusing on that brand and get, as quickly as possible, get your own shop infrastructure in place, the D2C infrastructure in place, shift the customers to your infrastructure, and make sure that you get those relationships going, because that's what you can monetize. That's where the actual profit and growth is in that customer relationship. And that's why I'm so bullish about things going on in the e-commerce space, where we see a lot of people focusing on developing their apps, developing their web shop infrastructure, developing their CRM infrastructure to identify that, because that's where real value is generated.
And also, when they do that, they're strongly reducing complexity that you addressed at the beginning of this conversation. Whereas you might not realize it along the way, but after a while, especially seeing the market right now, there's a huge wave of sustainability, right? For bigger companies, sustainability and how to make the supply chain sustainable, how to make this entire thing is a gigantic problem, right? So this is why we see rather smaller players being able to adjust themselves, build everything from the ground up on sustainable principles. But when you look at big companies, they want to be part of the change, but it's very, very sophisticated, right?
It is. Interestingly enough, you see that in other industries as well. So someone that goes and re-engineers a product from the ground up, Tesla and electric vehicles, versus someone building on an existing platform and trying to electrify it.
Yeah.
Completely different products that come out. And
different outcomes too.
Exactly. So I think it's very true in the sustainable argument. Those are the reasons why there will always be a strong, vibrant e-commerce ecosystem in the startup area, because a lot of change has to come from that side.
Yeah.
I still would say you have to protect yourself against the imitators. You have to protect yourself really on the copycats, because the marketplaces make their entry easy. So if you don't manage to get beyond the marketplace, use it as a proof of concept and build your customer base, you'll always be vulnerable to that. Amazon and co, they're doing a lot to make it easy for the Chinese factories to supply markets directly. They don't even have to have a warehouse anymore. The infrastructure is there. They can ship containers directly to Amazon in China, and China takes care of the rest.
Yeah.
That's on one side scary. And it just says more and more why you have to have that strong brand, your own infrastructure, and that customer relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree. And on the other hand, not every customer thinks the same way. They just don't. I mean, we know that throughout the last 5-6 years, Google versus Amazon, at least in the German market, people used to go to Google and search for products more and more. Nowadays, we see that rapidly changing, and Amazon is the strongest product search engine. So people go there and search for a product, but that's not the entire customer journey. But people also compare products elsewhere, and also with the new generation of consumers, they act and they look at a couple of different factors and won't just settle with the first cheapest option that they see, right?
Yes.
It's all these factors considered. I think startups have a lot to consider and a lot to think about in terms of really setting the business on a solid ground for the future. Talking about this solid ground, in our prior talk today, you mentioned a couple of anecdotes about what's the next big thing coming. Could you tell us, for anyone out there that have a business, that are starting to think of creating a business, what do you see is going to be the next big challenge that we are facing or will be facing, at least in e-commerce?
I think it's so many areas. One area that I see is everyone has to get used to the world changing, and the world changing fast. That's the only thing that's certain. So from one crisis and the next crisis, and COVID, one start, Ukraine war, another crisis. The next crisis is just around the corner. And I think that what everyone needs to think about is, how do I get ready for that? How do I protect myself around that? And a lot of it is consistency. It's having well thought through processes. It's about having tools in place, systems in place that allow you to grow and scale, because you don't know what will happen. And one thing that we see now that's going on, I saw a headline just a few days ago, and they're talking about China's nuclear winter. And this whole idea of COVID, the isolation policy has been taken away. And now there is really huge problems coming with people simply getting sick. And that is going to seriously disrupt product flows taking place. And China is Europe's workbench. I mean, the products that you're buying in e-commerce, a lot of it, most of it is being produced in China. We already saw when there's supply chain disruptions on the shipping side.
Yeah.
But now it's going to be on the production side, and it's going to be there massively coming up.
I mean, we're already seeing massive problems in Europe in terms of supply chains and delivery times and all these things. And to imagine that it's going to get worse is, what's the time frame we're looking at?
Oh, I think that we're going to, normally right now, you've got Chinese New Year coming up. So there's always a crunch time right now in factories. And these waves are going to take place with product that's being produced now through just after Chinese New Year. So you're talking about with a 3-month delay, spring, summer 2023, that we're going to be seeing impact on that side.
Yeah. And on the other hand, many businesses are trying to produce as locally as possible, right? So reduce this dependency, because I think the Ukraine crisis was a big wake-up moment for a lot of us, because the supply chains are very complex and sophisticated. And one thing that's not really functioning in that entire picture can have a massive impact. And that's why I think businesses have to start asking themselves today, how can we limit that dependency, and what are the local alternatives, perhaps, right?
And I really do believe in that. I think that production is going to be coming back, and it's also around the emotionality of brands. And you know, you look at big brands, and Apple moving chip production into the US, who would have thought that just a couple of years ago, that something like that will take place. I think there's going to be more and more of that. And when building up a new brand, the sustainability aspect covers that as well.
Yeah. Robert, you've been working in the field of e-commerce for 22 years, right? During that time, I think you've also seen big mistakes that e-commerce brands might be doing. So today I'm curious to ask you, what are the 5 no-goes for any business, any e-commerce startup, to prevent, so that they don't repeat the same mistakes that you've seen throughout your time?
I think the biggest mistake is to focus on revenue. It's not just about revenue. It's not about revenue growth. I think that one of the crises that we haven't talked about that's hitting e-commerce now, funds are drying up. So people have to focus on making money. And it's not just making money, but having a cash flow positive business model. You have to make sure that you can even fund your growth. You don't have the option of growing bankrupt. This scenario of saying, well, I'm growing small, and I have a positive EBITDA, but you know what, I'm running out of cash, because you can't get that cash on the market anymore. So focusing on the basics, really, really important. For me, no-go, don't be single channel. You have to be multi-channel. You have to go where your customer is. Then when you have that customer, you have to have an infrastructure to keep that customer.
Yeah.
So you have to build an infrastructure to go on that side, and to really be able to keep and make that a repeat buyer for you. So
what did you say? Wiederholtäter?
Wiederholtäter, exactly, yes.
Yeah, okay, you were at 2. I don't know if you want to leave it at 3 or 5.
I think that those are really getting back. It's not just about sales, and it's not about sales growth.
Yeah.
Keep your brand healthy, don't expand into many products. That would be a third element.
Yeah.
With every single product you bring in, you have to think about, from content to how I'm going to manage from the purchasing side, from the stock side.
Yeah.
The more channels, the more products, how many prices I have to change, how many competitive products I have that I'm trying to keep an eye on. It increases complexity a lot. And if you don't do one more product, but you do 100 more products or 1,000 more products, you can imagine where the complexity will take you.
Yeah.
And you have to have the process to deal with the complexity before you make that step. Otherwise, it can kill you.
Yeah. And to add to that, maybe it's a natural consequence is that you have to inevitably rely on tools like AI-based tools to make that automation possible.
And AI will help there. It just takes more time than what you think. Focus on, when thinking about AI, Use tools that are there that are already pulling data across the entire market. Don't try to build everything yourself. I can say when I first got involved with thinking about AI, I thought I can do everything with it. And a lot of initial pilots of what I worked on in the technology realized that, you know what, technically it would work, but I don't have the data.
And in certain cases, you also invest quite a lot of energy, quite a lot of effort, and also money into testing these cases. Do you have maybe a concrete example for us?
I do. I would always love to be able to predict how much I'm going to sell from a specific product in a specific channel, and at best at which price. And I'd like to validate that with real data. Now, in order to do that production, and say Berlin Brand Group, we're active in 100 different channels, 23 markets. I take one product and I start extrapolating how many of those really decision points I want to predict, and how much data I need in which time period to predict that. And then I have seasonality on top of it. And we realized, you know what, we don't have that. We don't have that yet.
It's very granular.
Yes. So different approach. Try to get all the market data and then see how, on average, your product performs against the market. From the market data, you can make predictions about the market, and then you can make predictions about how you perform against that. But you need external partners to do that and larger AI models. Talking
about AI, I also think of additional channels that many e-commerce businesses have not tapped into. Voice assistants and all that type of stuff, because many of us have these assistants in our homes. Voice commerce is a thing. It was a bigger buzz a couple of years ago, but how do you see that emerging?
I always judge those things on my own behavior, and I know that's limited, and you try it for the novelty, but it's not there yet on using it to actually shop and to buy. And then I gauge on my son. My son is 18 years old, and always look and say, okay, that's where the trends for the next generation are. And there's no voice command type of commerce that I see in his generation or him using. They use voice for a lot more. They dictate a lot more. They're using it, but not to buy yet. So I think there's a ways to go. I think that the AI-based cognitive ability of understanding language is going to help us along that path faster. But I haven't found from a smart speaker how somebody will describe a product to me. And if I really want to browse and make a buying decision, will I do that? Maybe not.
Because we're pretty much used to seeing visual input and just working with that, right? So reading content descriptions and all product descriptions and all that stuff.
Right. Now, where I do think is everything that's consumable. So if I build in a voice component on my refrigerator, every time I use something, I'm doing my shopping list. My shopping list is then tied in with an online grocery platform. Then I would have my basics that I'm buying. I know which brands. It's configured. It knows what I want. And it just is going, and I can say, oh, I need bananas again. So my next order is going to have bananas in place. So I don't have to think about it at that point. Those are areas where I think language will come in place, but we're still a long way off.
I have the same feeling, judging from, just like you, I feel like I'm part of the market. I'm a consumer myself. So far, I've really been hesitant because I feel like, what if I'm misunderstood and just this thing just buys something completely off? You know what I mean? So, and you don't know. I mean, you want to compare, you want to take a look at different things. There are different types of personas, different types of journeys, and I think it's not very linear in that sense, right? I think we've covered quite a big base, talking about startups, talking about established businesses, what are tools that you can tap into, how to avoid complexity, how not to fall into certain traps. And you've talked about 3 big mistakes that you see in the last but 22 years. Robert, it's been great having you as part of our conversation. Thank you for taking the time, and thanks for the insights that you provided today.
Thank you from my side as well.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the E-commerce Germany News Podcast. If you did, make sure to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and follow us on our channels. Feel free to also recommend this podcast to your contacts and friends that may want to know more about e-commerce, digital marketing, and success stories. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and see you on the next episode.